بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to continue our study of Introduction to Philosophy by Ayatullah Mutahhri. We started lesson 7 of the book with a little introduction to Al-Hikmatul Muta'aliyah, to transcendent philosophy. Because in the previous lesson he talked about 4 intellectual currents in the Islamic world. He talked about Mutakallimin, he talked about Urafa, he talked about Ishraqiyin, and then Masha'in. In the 5th lesson he says we have another current which is Al-Hikmatul Muta'aliyah, introduced by Mullah Sadra, and we talked about it, alhamdulillah. The next point in lesson 5 is about 4 types of philosophy. This is based on methodology. One is what he calls Al-Hikmatul Istidlaliyah. This is a type of philosophical exercise which is purely based on reasoning, intellectual reasoning. You argue, you bring qiyas, sughra, kubra, minor, premise, major premise, conclusion. Everything is just purely conceptual, purely intellectual. The second type is what he calls al-hikmatu dhawqiyya. Dhawq means to taste. Yeah, dhawq. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut means taste. The reason this is called dhawq is because here, in addition to reasoning, you try to taste, to experience realities through intuition, through mystical findings, through ishraq, illumination of the heart, through inspiration. This is another method, like method of Sheikh Ishraq, which was mixing or combining or bringing together reasoning along with mystical exercises. Then third is what they call al-hikmatul jadaliyya. Those of you who have studied logic, you know that we have 5 types of reasoning, or they call sana'at khams. One is jadal. Jadal is different from burhan. In philosophy we need burhan. Burhan is decisive, is certain, uses certain premises, al-muqaddamatul yaqiniyya. But jadal is a kind of contest, a kind of argumentation that may use things which are necessarily known to be true, which are certain, or things which are accepted by the other party. In jadal, you may use something that even you may not believe, but because the other party believes, you can use it and show how that position is problematic. Yeah? Like, for example, in the case of Prophet Ibrahim ala nabiyyina wa alayhi salam, One interpretation can be that he was arguing with them when he said, Hadha Rabbi, for example, looking at the sun, the moon, stars, maybe he was doing jadali argument with them. What does it mean? Means he was using their own ideas and proving to them that this is not correct. Yeah, so in jadal you can do that. This is called musallamat. Assalamu alaikum. What are accepted by the other part. Or sometimes you use maghbulat or mashhurat. Inshallah, when you study logic properly, you will learn all these things. But briefly, for the time being, this is enough to know. Mashhurat means those things which are famous, very common. People keep quoting them, saying them, but no one has proved them, and maybe even they are not correct. Yeah. So, for example, many proverbs people use, and based on that they argue. For example, in Farsi, sometimes people say this: "Khahi nashavi ruswa, hamrang jama'at sho." If you don't want to be singled out, it's better to take the color, to adopt the color of people, the color of majority. So in order not to remain in a weak position, try to be like majority. Okay, many times people say this, but who proved this and who said this is correct? Yeah, maybe there is a point that, like we say, do in Rome as Romans do. There is some point when it comes to some customs, some regulations, that they just bring harmony. But if there are some regulations or customs or principles that contradict our ideas or our principles or conflict with the truth, why I should follow? Just because majority say something, why I should follow? So there are many things that people may believe, but they cannot prove to be true. Okay? So this is called al-hikmatul jadaliyya. And then we have al-hikmatul tajribiyya, empirical philosophy or wisdom. If you remember, we talked about this before. We said there are people who don't believe in philosophy, they only believe in empirical knowledge. The only type of philosophy that they accept is just to put empirical data together and come up with some general rules. They don't believe in anything more than that. Like for example, Marxists, they believed that Marxism is scientific. They accepted that, although they didn't believe in philosophy in general. So there are 4 types: al-hikmah, al-istidlaliyya, which is based on reasoning; al-hikmah al-dhawqiyya, which is based on tasting reality, truth, through your spirituality, through your mystical findings, in addition to reasoning; al-hikmatul jadaliyya, which is by using jadal, which is a type of reasoning which is not aiming at proving the truth, it's aiming as convincing the other party. Therefore you can use arguments which are accepted by that person even if they are not proved. And al-hikmatul tajribiyya, which is to put empirical data together and come up with general ideas, not more than that. So Ayatullah Mutahhri says, mutakallimin, theologians, many times use jadal. And philosophers are therefore critical of them. They say, you sometimes don't make sure that this is certain and is founded on certainty. You just argue for the sake of proving that the other party is wrong, etc. And one case which is used against them, or one type of arguments which is mentioned here, is the issue of husn qub. They say many times mutakallimin, they rely on husn qub. They say this is good or this is bad, or this is ugly action, or immoral action, or this is good action, beautiful action. And they say husn qub, this goodness and badness, they say these are not what we normally see them proving. They try to take it from public view. Therefore, philosophers had this kind of criticism against mutakallimin. But in the Shia tradition, he says that philosophy came very much close to theology, to kalam. Because although philosophy has to be independent, you remember we said last week, philosophy is different from kalam, because kalam is committed to support a religion or a denomination, to defend, to prove, to explain ideas, doctrines of faith. Philosophy is just using aql to discover the truth. Philosophers as such are not committing themselves to prove this religion or that religion, this mazhab or that mazhab. Yes? But anyway, when they use their aql, certainly they come to some conclusions. The conclusions that Muslim philosophers came to after independent philosophical discourse were very similar to the ideas of Islam, especially in the school of Ahlul Bayt, which is very much rational. Therefore, people like Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi Rahmatullah Alayhi, who was himself a great philosopher, managed to bring kalam and philosophy very much close to each other. So this type of kalam, if you are meaning by kalam of Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi and Allami Halli and the last few centuries in the school of Ahlul Bayt, this kalam is not jadali, it is also istidlali or burhani. They can use jadal if they want, but for those things which are the main principles, they use burhan. So this is about the difference between hikmat al-jadali and hikmat al-istidlali. Then he has a little also point discussion about hikmat al-tajribi, empirical philosophy, which if there was such a thing like empirical philosophy could be good, but philosophy as such has such claims which are universal, and you cannot prove them with experiments, with laboratory and the tools that they have there. But if they mean bringing just some ideas close to each other and make some general claims, okay, that's no problem. The only thing that they have to consider is that, first of all, this would not answer to many of our fundamental questions in philosophy. For example, if we want to know whether there is a beginning for time or there is no beginning for time, or whether this world has limit or not, how can you use experience in empirical sciences to prove or to take any position? Or if you want to talk about God, for example, you cannot say because I cannot experience God in my laboratory, God doesn't exist. And you cannot also find God there. So it's totally silent. And also those things which are proved by experience and through experiments, even today, the scientists themselves say, philosophers of science also say, that they cannot be proved to be 100% true, because there's always chance that they find counter examples. There is always chance that there are conditions that if they change, this can change. So there is no decisiveness here. We can only find true certainty in philosophy and mathematics if we want to really have certainty. The next lesson, lesson 6, is about problems or issues. When I say problem, we mean issues that we discussed in philosophy. Al-masail, problem in the sense of issue, subjects. In philosophy, in the way that traditionally philosophy is understood, the subject matter is being as such. Al-mawjud bima huwa mawjud. Okay? So we talk about mawjud bima huwa mawjud. In contrast to other disciplines that they study some type of mawjud. For example, in medicine, they study human body with respect to illness and disease. In geometry, in algebra, in physics, in every discipline, they have their own subject matter that they study. Anything which relates to all beings, or beings as such, beings in a general way, in an absolute way, is discussed in philosophy. This is why we said it is considered as mother for other disciplines. So, what are the issues? He lists some of the main topics in philosophy about being as such. For example, there are issues, especially in Mullah Sadra philosophy, that we discuss about existence in contrast to non-existence. Al-wujud wal-adam. We have many topics related to wujud in contrast to adam. Also, we have many discussions about wujud, existence, in contrast to what? Mahiyya, quiddity. We have many topics about, like asalatul wujud wa i'tibariyatul mahiyya, tashkik fil wujud, etc., not fil mahiyya. Many discussions about wujud and mahiyya. Of course, what is real is only wujud. Non-existence, adam, doesn't exist. Mahiyya also doesn't exist by itself. But these are two concepts that our mind brings in order to explain things. So from wujud, our mind also brings the concept of adam and mahiyya, so that we can analyze things. So some discussions are about wujud and mahiyya, some are about wujud and adam. Then we have many discussions in philosophy about divisions of wujud, divisions of mawjud bima huwa mawjud, classifications. But what type of divisions? Because there are many divisions in different sciences. At-taqsimatul awwaliyya lil wujud, primary divisions or classifications of being. Those things which relate to being as such, not, for example, about different parts of, chemicals, etc. This is not about philosophy. But those things which are about being as such, like dividing existence into عيني and ذهني. الوجود إما عيني أو ذهني. Existence is either objective, external, or mental. وجود عيني and ذهني. Or وجود is either واجب or ممكن, necessary or contingent. وجود is either حادث or قديم. حادث means has a history of non-existence. قديم means eternal. It has no history of non-existence. وجود is ثابت أو متغير. Sometimes it's changeable, sometimes it's fixed. وجود is واحد and or كثير, one or multiple. وجود is بالقوة أو بالفعل, actual or potential. وجود is جوهر or araz. Of course, جوهر in a expanded meaning, because جوهر and araz are two types of mahiyya. But if you mean by جوهر anything which is not araz, then it can include wajib al-wujud as well. Means anything which doesn't need subject. So, some problems in philosophy, some issues in philosophy relate to the first and primary classifications or divisions of wujud. The next issues in philosophy are about general principles and laws of existence, like causality. Causality is a very important part of philosophy, discussion about causality. Or about the need of cause and effect matching each other. سنخية بين العلة والمعلول. Or necessity between complete cause and ma'lul. Or being together or preceding. Sometimes beings exist together, sometimes they precede. تقدم وتأخر. In contrast to ma'iyya. Ma'iyya means to be together. تقدم وتأخر means to precede or to come later. So these are different discussions in philosophy. The next thing that we discuss in philosophy is about different worlds, different universes. Muslim philosophers say that we have 4 worlds, 4 universes, if you want to call alam. The lowest one is what? Alam tabi'at or nasut. Nasut or alam tabi'at. This physical world, this nature, what we see, what we taste, what we smell, what occupies a space, it is all alam tabi'at or nasut. Above this is alam mithal or malakut. Alam mithal is similar to barzakh. There is shape, there is size, but there is no physical mass. Okay? There is no change. If you have a true dream, you are connected to alam mithal or alam barzakh. This is the second one. The third is what they call alam jabarut or uqul, the intellects. And here there is no form, no shape. And the fourth, they call it alam lahut or uluhiyat, which is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the peak of these 4 universes. And then finally, some discussions of philosophy are about how existence has come down from Alam al-Lahut all the way to Alam al-Nasut, and then how it goes back to God. The issue of ma'ad, or return, especially for human being. For human being, return to God is very important. And in Hikmat Muta'alliya of Mullah Sadra, he has lots of discussion about ma'ad, about this return or resurrection. Okay, so Alhamdulillah, we discussed also lesson 6. Inshallah, in the next session we continue with some of these topics. This was a list and a way they have developed these discussions. From next session, we will very briefly introduce some of these philosophical issues or problems. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you very much, Sheikh.
You're welcome.
We now have maybe 5-10 minutes for questions, if there are any.